I want to welcome everybody back to our final day of Infrastructure Week. Thanks for joining this session where we talk equitable infrastructure and committing ourselves to begin a just normal. As part of today's session, we have Elise Aiden, Program Coordinator for Environmental Engagement at the Port of Seattle, followed by a replay of our Youth Leaders on Infrastructure session, a really special gathering with the Duwamish Valley Youth Corps and IA Plus, introducing youth to American infrastructure. The Duwamish River Cleanup Coalition was unable to join us today, but we'd like to take a moment to thank James Rasmussen, Paulina Lopez, Carmen Martinez, and their staff for their persistence and long-standing efforts here in the Duwamish Valley. The DRCC and Technical Advisory Group supports restoration and cleanup efforts to bring environmental justice to communities affected by the 5.5-mile-long Superfund site that is the end of the Duwamish River. This event is part of United for Infrastructure, and I encourage anyone curious about what politicians and municipal leaders around the country are doing about infrastructure to check out their Vimeo page. Some really excellent content they put out this week. We host our local Seattle event to highlight professional stewardship, bringing public awareness and community engagement to accelerate transformative ecological change in the infrastructure evolution. I'm Robert Hanlon with Utility Squared. We connect communities to our infrastructure engineering solutions with our fellow neighbors as primary stakeholders. I want to acknowledge that we are gathered on the unceded land of Indigenous peoples. Land throughout America was claimed and redeveloped by foreign colonizers through documented exclusions and erasures of many Indigenous peoples. I ask that everyone acknowledges this truth, respecting present and future cultural preservation to support the process of seeking environmental justice for Indigenous communities. And I want to share this amazing resource. I'll put the link in the chat. And I encourage everybody to familiarize yourself with the First Nations throughout North America. And as you notice, there's a lot of overlapping. We shared this land, and free of political official boundaries. So, like I said, I'll post a link to this, a very, very awesome resource to check out and become familiar with. Now, Infrastructure Week is here for us to rethink infrastructure and how our daily lives are shaped by it. We've covered the various aspects in previous sessions in hopes of building a broader perspective and understanding. We must remember that public engagement is as important as the physical infrastructure itself. And for too long, we have watched or experienced the symptoms of failing infrastructure and urban policy. As we now watch the biggest infrastructure investment unfold with the Build Back Better and American Jobs Plan, I'd like to thank advocates and social activists for bringing us to this moment. And the importance of perspectives is so critical when we think about our infrastructure and achieving equity among communities. This isn't about handouts or some socialist agenda. It's about acknowledging that not all of us have equal access to the modern amenities we often take for granted. Disparities exist in both city and household infrastructure. Things like in-home washing machines, broadband access with reasonable internet connectivity, efficient and effective heating and cooling in our homes, and even access to a garden or backyard. Again, these are amenities that many of us have, but many of us do not have. And there's the larger issue of home ownership itself, with systemic inequalities for BIPOC communities whose housing security is subject to landlords and the uncertainty of free market rent. A study by the University of Washington found that between 2013 and 2017 in King County, 1 in 11 Black adults were evicted compared to 1 in 100 whites, an order of magnitude more. Other studies have shown that 20% of the people evicted become homeless, a disturbing statistic signifying the affordability crisis and issues of rapid gentrification in otherwise affordable neighborhoods. Another concerning indicator of inequality is that 46% of Washington renters are rent burdened, meaning they spend at least a third of their household income directly to rent. But getting back to infrastructure, as our youth leaders will point out, there's a massive divide between predominantly white affluent neighborhoods and BIPOC and low-income communities. As you can see from this picture, this is from the Duwamish Trail. Just one example. It's loud, it's bumpy, it's smelly, and it's poorly marked. I ride it 3 to 4 times a week, and I can't help but think of the days of the Elliott Bay Trail and Burt Gilman Trail in the northern neighborhoods that are well marked, they're smooth, and they are connected. You could get to places. I could get downtown from my apartment in maybe 15 minutes. So just the disparagement in bike trails is a sign. And most critical for the infrastructure evolution is to address environmental racism and classism, the disproportionate impact of environmental hazards on people of color and low-income communities. These include institutional policies, corporate decisions that deliberate target these neighborhoods for locally undesirable land uses, and lax enforcement of zoning and environmental laws. It ultimately results in these communities being adversely exposed to toxic and hazardous waste. And while many of these development decisions were made decades ago, the effects remain omnipresent. Contaminated water and soils like that here in the Duwamish River, increased rates of asthma, heart disease, lower birth rate, and shortened lifespan. Now, this issue is very complicated, so check out the Environmental Justice Disparities Map, an excellent resource from Front and Center. I will post a link in the chat. And the issue of environmental justice aside, we must strive to make equitable infrastructure investments and build 15-minute communities. The idea of reasonable walkable access to the basic urban elements in effort to improve health and welfare while also reducing environmental impact. This includes eliminating food deserts and provide access to fresh and healthy choices, ensuring the preservation or construction of green spaces and recreational facilities, improving public transportation and bike lanes to reduce reliance on individual vehicles. These investments shouldn't be reserved for just the wealthy communities. So what can we do about tackling modernity's problem scope, these issues that have come through the massive growth of the urban environment? I'd say the first step is quite easy. We can drop the ego trip in acknowledging privilege. We can all be very proud of the individual achievements that we've had, while also holding compassion and understanding for the adversity so many others have faced. Secondly, we can be good neighbors and active community members, aware and engaged, and volunteering if possible. I've never lived anywhere that has had such a strong community as South Park through pandemic. Regular folk have stepped up to the plate to operate no less than 3 neighborhood food banks at any given time and fridges, offering prepared meals for those in need, hosting regular meetings and support through social media, and monthly neighborhood cleanup walks, things that we can all be a part of. Thirdly, let's take what we've learned from our presenters this week and build better habits. Whether it's sorting your municipal solid waste per your service provider, conserving energy, or being a water steward, behavior change is a pillar of sustainability. And as professionals, most importantly, we can do better. Let's not settle for the extractive status quo of infrastructure strategy. Let's focus this environmental justice and community-based solutions as center stage when both planning and building new infrastructure. We must expand traditional performance criteria, push for innovation, and think about what the next generation, continuing the human era, on these foundations that we build today. United for infrastructure, the future is truly up to us. As professionals, consumers, and neighbors, we can work together to build for tomorrow and create the idea of a just normal. And now it's time for our first speaker, Elise Aiden with the Port of Seattle, talking about their environmental justice and restoration efforts in South King County. Elise so gracefully joined us very last minute. DRCC had a conflict come up, so we are thankful that you're able to assemble this last minute. I know you guys are doing a lot of things. I'm so excited for the Shoreline Habitat project.
Yes,
so thanks for joining us.
Does that work?
Yeah, let's try doing your presentation and we'll make sure it goes to the right screen. Sometimes you just got it. There we go. That was perfect.
Okay, so I'll actually start from the beginning. Hi, everybody. Happy Friday. My name is Elise Aiden. I am on the community engagement team at the Port of Seattle, and I specifically work on the environmental engagement work, our two programs. So we have the Duwamish Valley Community Equity Program, and then we also have the South King County Fund Environmental Grants Program. So I'm kind of going to do like an overview of the two. And Robert, thank you so much for this opportunity to kind of share this work, but also to your point, I'm going to kind of hit on some of those points that you just laid out. And so it's a pleasure to share this with you all. So just to give you a background of the Port of Seattle, it was founded in 1911 and it is King County wide. So even though the name is Port of Seattle, it is voted on by the residents of King County. And so we have 5 commissioners who really help lead the work that we do in the 2 main industries, maritime and aviation. So our maritime really has the coverage of the cruises, the ships, anything you think about around the sea in Puget Sound is our side. And then for aviation, of course, if you've been to the Seattle-Tacoma Airport, you are under the jurisdiction of the Port of Seattle. So we have the 2 programs. I'm going to start with the Duwamish Valley Community Equity Program. And so this program really speaks to how do we support Georgetown and South Park communities in making sure that we're better partners in this community. How to support give back in a way that actually is beneficial to the community, but also informs us how do we do better as your neighbors, right? So, and especially along the Duwamish River and the history of the port, how do we become your partners? So the past few years, with the commission, with amazing staff at the port, we've kind of been leading this effort to push forward. What does health look like? What does community building look like? What does, how do we support jobs, economic recovery? How do we build all of these things that maybe the underserved communities across Seattle, King County, all of those areas that don't necessarily have insight on what is the port, who are we, right? So in 2019, the commissioners, again, led by amazing staff members, built out the Duwamish Valley Community Benefits Commitment. And in that commitment, the biggest part that I want to highlight here is our ability to, have economic prosperity in place, right? So with the Duwamish River Community Hub, which I'll highlight towards the end, it comes out of this idea of, okay, so what does displacement look like? How are we adding to displacement? How are we adding to gentrification? How do we add to the communities that are already in place, that have been here for generations? And of course, like acknowledging the land. So again, Robert, thank you so much for acknowledging the land that we are honored to be on. And so the 3 parts that I want to hit on is with this place-based economic resilience, we have the economic displacement piece. So that's, your traditional kind of gentrification, can't afford rent anymore, sky high, everything is like unaffordable in the area. Does it really make sense for me to continue to be here? And we've seen that a lot, especially in the Seattle area for the past few years. And then we have the physical displacement, which really talks about the legal parts, right? So was it, condemnation of the building? Was it an eviction? Was it like, what was the reason you physically had to get out of that place? And then there's the cultural part, which really highlights, if you have so many of your community attachments now gone, maybe due to economic displacement and maybe due to physical displacement, does it make sense for me to live here anymore, right? And I just moved from the Central District, so I'm using that example as, okay, so when we think about African-American community and Black community in Seattle, if everybody's gone now, do I really see myself as a part of this community, right? So that cultural piece actually is a really big anchor in keeping people together, right? And so these are kind of the ideas that really framed what does economic resilience, but what does place-based economic resilience look like? So with a few of our amazing partners, including the Port Community Action Team, also known as PCAT, in South Park and Georgetown, they kind of inform this really, these ideas of what does it look like for the port to be better partners. And so along with the guiding principles here, we have equitable development, inclusion and cultural competency, community engagement, and anti-displacement. So these guiding principles are really like, how do we function in South Park and Georgetown, again, as better neighbors. So with that being said, out of this kind of conclusion of there's a space available. And if you guys see the picture, it is the former Napoli Pizzeria that was there for decades. And the owners actually sold it. I think it was 2019 they had sold it. And it was, a community staple. It's right after the South Park Bridge, and it's that yellow color. If you've been around, you know it. So when they sold it, the new owners, of course, none of us really knew the pandemic was ahead of us in 2020, but the new owners really didn't know what to do with it. And so a few folks got together and they were like, wow, if you're not doing anything, how can we better utilize the space? How can we activate this space and make it something that is really beneficial to the whole area, right? The whole community, to say, you can go to the port area. I actually work out of the airport, but you can also go to the peer office, right, to meet us, or we can come to your meeting spaces. But what does it look like if we do it a step further to build off of our commitment and say, actually, let's have a community-centered space where we, can literally meet you where you're at. And so with some of the, again, awesome staff members who last year ended up talking with the owner, and he was like, I'd be happy to lease it for the next 3 years. So the port commissioners approved it in January. And so we are hoping to activate the space as kind of a hub, a community hub that really builds off of the workforce development, that builds off of like how can we support our major industries, maritime, aviation, how do we support green jobs, how do we build youth and adult workshops that train them on these industries that really so many people are retiring now, and we need it. This is a big part of our infrastructure, right? Is how do we get these, how do we get folks to know about construction opportunities, opportunities to work on boats, ships, all the things that we take for granted. How does it get here? It gets here some way. So how do we train folks to be in these really well-paying and really great benefits jobs? So with that being said, I'm sorry, I talk a lot too, but so we end up leasing this space. Hopefully it'll open early this summer. So it's got an amazing parking lot in the back that we're hoping for some community engagement events, meeting space for, all kinds of things connected to port-related industries. So, so as I mentioned before, one of our major goals is economic prosperity in place. So the on-site activities will be youth career connected learning, port industry recruitment, career fairs, open houses, really supporting our small businesses and women and minority-owned businesses. And then just 2 blocks away is the Duwamish River People's Park. So that's the park that you referred to earlier, Robert. I'm so glad it's coming along. And so there's the Shoreline Habitat where we're doing, our team is amazing that's actually leading all of the work, but it was recently renamed, shout out to Christina Billingsley, with her efforts on the port side and community efforts to not use these terminal numbers, right? Terminal 117 was actually the name of Duwamish River People's Park until it was renamed. I think it was last year. There was a whole big renaming campaign because who wants to go to Terminal 117 for a bike ride or a walk? It doesn't correlate and connect with community, right? So the Duwamish River People's Park is the name, and Shoreline Habitat. And that's only just 2 blocks away. So I'm hoping the connection between the hub and getting out and engaged. And then, you know, once we start seeing amazing salmon that you can actually fish, come back. And then we have a connection with the Maritime High School, which will be opening in the fall through the Highline School District. And so that will have it's the first cohort of students who are interested in maritime industry work and just learning about it, so we can start building kind of the trade skills that we really need to in this economy at least. So that's the Duwamish Valley work and the community hub, and I'm so looking forward to updating y'all when it opens early this summer and see what we're, you know, what does programming look like? So yeah, super excited about that. And the second part I wanted to highlight is the South King County Fund, the environmental grants. So this grant is really focused on the 6 major cities around the airport. So it's Burien, Des Moines, Federal Way, Normandy Park, SeaTac, and Tukwila. And so we are getting, and this is its actual first year, was this past, at the end of 2020 was the first cohort of grantees. And so we're looking to support community organizations, community groups, to kind of get in there and see what do we need in our neighborhoods? What are the beautiful parks and beautiful spaces that we want for our families, our kids, you know? And so we chose the near airport cities right now for the geographic purposes, but you know, who knows what we build off of. But we're really connected to building off of the Green Cities partnerships, right? How do we start with, you know, talking to community organizations that might not, number one, know what the port does, but number two, not know about this grant process rather than just the traditional kind of business model contracting process. So we do the community engagement for that, and we're looking for organizations that want to go out and do public improvements on lands in those 6 cities. And you can have up to $20,000 for the grant. So, and it's a year-long grant process. So it's really exciting, and I'm super pumped that I get to work on this because I love being outdoors. And then, so I wanted to mention the 8 principles for the South King County Fund. So I'll quickly go over these, and then you can kind of see the equity index over here that we use around those 6 cities. But, you know, fund projects in near airport communities with other locations considered on a case-by-case basis, prioritize community input to inform port decision-making, support port equity policies and practices, provide added benefit to current programs, and prioritize projects that we're ready to proceed with. We build on established programs, and we promote innovation and encourage matching funds where possible. So in this case, you'd have to actually do a matching fund, which essentially means we do, for every dollar you ask for, it has to be matched 3 by 3. So that could be used through either tree value, that if you plant trees, it could be volunteer hours, or it could be cash and donations or other grants that can match your funds, because again, we are a special purpose government that helps us do this. So yeah, so we also use an equity index to figure out what are the most vulnerable communities. So the darker blue colors are really where, you know, we have less tree canopy, we have maybe more cases of asthma. You know, there's 23 considerations in this equity index that we're using. So it's really, I mean, there's so much, right? There's like so much to figure out and how to better support our communities. And I'm just really proud and pumped that, for the past few years, the port is pushing towards that equity, the funding process, and really highlighting the environment as a big priority. So yeah, so that's me. And if anybody has questions, you can definitely email me. That's aiden.i@portseattle.org.
And if there's any questions, put them in the chat, Q&A, whatever works.
Yeah.
I do want to echo how awesome it is that, I mean, the Maritime High School, I'm really excited about that. Learning about like the Maritime Academies was eye-opening to me, but now bringing that to at the high school level is really important for workforce development, but also like interesting workforce development
Yes. Yes.
and
I
locally
totally
based, right?
locally based, and it's very unique. You don't get that opportunity in a lot of places. And I often think about, when I moved to the Seattle area, I guess I should say King County, I went to Duwamish High School my senior year, and they had a blowing glass class, and it was like one of 3 in the entire country. And I was like, well, I'm gonna sign up for this, because when else will I get to figure out how to blow glass? And so I kind of think about that with the Maritime High School, is what an awesome experience in high school to be able to, kind of carve out maybe an interesting trade or an area that you want to work in that you won't get the chance to do maybe after high school, or you'd never even think about it. So those are the kind of opportunities I'm super excited about too, Robert. Thank you.
And as part of that, I know Highline School District has a pretty awesome reputation, at least with the students I've talked to. And, is there like a continuing pathway after graduation, or is that kind of like built in?
I think with the aviation, because I think that was started before. They have a pathway, and I think they try to connect people. So I'm excited to see, because this will be our first freshman class for Maritime High School in the fall. Yeah, they'll definitely have a connection into what career paths they can do. And DRCC is one of the big championship folks that are leading that way with Highline.
And I know the South Park community, when Christina did her presentation, at our neighborhood meetings on the community hub, there's a lot of excitement, a lot of appreciation, and we have to acknowledge, like my privilege. I don't have kids, and when it comes to like infrastructure engagement, my free time is my free time to spend on reading articles, getting engaged, volunteering, and we got to remember that not everybody has that, whether it's taking care of the families at home or kids or, working long hours to pay that rent. Having that hub in this community is huge. So thank you for that.
Totally. And what I really love about it is its accessibility. And, even being right on a bus line, and, really trying to make sure like I said, again, the whole theme is, how do we be better partners and neighbors in communities? So yeah, I'm looking forward to it, and I'll definitely make sure I send an invite when it opens.
Well, count me in to help out with any infrastructure crash courses. So I'm here to help.
Okay, let me see this question from Pat. Okay, please listen. Yes. Okay, Pat, I'm gonna get your email.
And
Okay.
he and Becca do their awesome programs, Ask Evelyn on Wednesdays. So always great content. Check out I'll try to put their YouTube link in the chat.
Yes, yes. Thank you.